So hello, welcome to the video and welcome to Dublin Airport. Now I started my channel about 3.5 years ago, gulp, and in that time I've made about a dozen videos about tier point runs, but in that time I've never actually done one. Now a tier point run is a trip where the primary purpose is to gather as many status points as you can to achieve status with an airline. I suppose my Abu Dhabi to Jakarta trip does qualify as a tier point run, but I've never done one of the traditional ones, which is from continental Europe to the west coast of the United States. Now the reason why I haven't needed to do one is that British Airways very kindly kept on extending my status, so I actually haven't had to chase status for about 5 years now. But the day has finally come, and today I will be starting a tier point run from here in Dublin all the way to Los Angeles and back again. It's going to take me 7 days, there's 8 flights, and it will deliver 720 tier points. It's about 4 days of flying out of those 7, and I have something quite fun to look forward to in the middle in Los Angeles, but I'll talk more about that a bit later on. Now, some of the flights I'll be taking are quite good fun, and I'll make a specific video about those, but I wanted to make an overall video about what it's actually like to do one of these runs, a bit of a behind the scenes view if you like. They can be quite demanding on you in terms of the sleep you get, the jet lag you experience, the pressurization and repressurization of your body, and if you accept every drink that's offered to you, there are some pitfalls down that road too. So in addition to talking about that, I'll share a few things in this video that you want to have sorted before you embark on a trip like this. I'll warn you about some of the things you need to look out for as you're going around a trip like this, and I'll also give you a few hints about what might happen to you if things go wrong on a trip like this. That sounds pretty interesting to me, and if it sounds interesting to you, stick around. Hi, I'm Matt and this is Matt's Planet. I aim to entertain, educate and inspire with my travel adventures from planning to execution. I'll show you how you can travel in style for a lot less than you'd think. So subscribe so you can come with me. I recorded that in Dublin before the first flight, and having scripted it all out, I've realised it's actually 2 videos. In this one I'll talk about the outbound flight, and in next week's videos I'll talk about the return journey, as well as revealing what I did in LA in the middle. And before we start flying, some words on what I booked and how I booked it. The best fares for this sort of trip usually have a 6-month advanced purchase rule, so I bought this ticket last July, about 8 months before I travelled. I used this trip as the basis for the Return to the Matrix video I made about how to find these sorts of trips on ITA Matrix. You'll notice that LA was not the cheapest option, but I knew I wanted to end up in LA, so it would have ended up being more expensive overall if I'd ended my tier point run somewhere else and had bought the extra flights to get me down to LA. I also had an eye on the videos I wanted to make, so I wanted to fly across the Atlantic on American Airlines. And I also wanted to fly across America one way on American's transcontinental product and to fly back the other way on one of their regular planes, to be able to contrast those experiences. And I was able to find a route that ticked all of those boxes. The taxes and fees always wobble a bit when you flesh out a routing versus the fare that shows up at first on Matrix, but I was able to lock in 720 tier points for £1,547, a frankly abysmal £2.15 per tier point. But I had one eye on ending in LA and another on making good videos, and those factors conspired to make this a worthwhile investment for me. You could have paid less than £2 per tier point by ending your journey in one of those smaller Californian cities. And although I didn't screen record it, I was able to use the Matrix Power Tools add-in to push this itinerary to the British section of the American Airlines website and take it all the way through payment there. Previously I've had to call the airline to make a booking for a trip I found on Matrix, but it was superb to be able to complete the process end to end online in just a few minutes. So I booked Dublin to Heathrow to Philadelphia to Boston to LA, and LA to Charlotte to JFK to Heathrow to Dublin, and I was very happy to have done so. One thing to be aware of when booking one of these trips is that American Airlines is notorious for fiddling with their schedules. I don't think I've ever booked one of these trips and actually flown on the flights I booked. And sure enough, about 2 months after making the booking, I got an email saying there has been a change to your trip. I was notified of changes to the outbound and the return legs. Although, as can happen, the changes to the return legs were actually helpful. A very tight connection in Charlotte was amended to a much longer one, which cost me an hour in bed the morning of my return trip, but it made the whole thing a lot less stressful, on paper at least. The irony of that statement will be revealed in the second video to this series. The outbound changes were more of an issue. My Philadelphia to Boston leg was cancelled and I was rebooked on a direct flight to Los Angeles. This probably made great sense to the airline, but it meant two things. I lost my leg on the transcontinental aircraft and it cost me 40 tier points as I wasn't flying that short domestic leg. I had planned for this trip to deliver precisely the 1500 tier points I needed, so to lose 40 tier points from this itinerary was a problem. And I decided not to do anything for a couple of months. It is really frustrating to invest a chunk of time in fixing a change to American schedules only for them to tinker with the schedules again later on, which has happened to me in the past. So I left it a couple of months and called a couple of months before travel and had a very entertaining interaction with an agent. He seemed quite annoyed that I'd left it that long and was very reluctant to do anything because tickets don't work that way, mate. Despite working for American Airlines, he seemed to have honed his customer service skills by selling fruit off a barrow in the East End of London. Despite the ticket that I'd actually booked, clearly demonstrating that this sort of routing was entirely possible, it took a conversation between him and his supervisor and then another one between him and his manager to finally conclude that this was actually possible on these tickets. And he was eventually able to reinstate the 40 tier points that I'd lost as a result of American's changes. And that call was about 80 minutes of my life that I'm never going to get back. It was all a bit of a pain, but we got there, and one benefit of having to make changes under these circumstances is that American Airlines seems able to draw inventory from a deeper pool of seats than you can draw from when you make the original booking. I was rebooked into a D fare bucket for that transcontinental leg, having been in an I bucket originally. So if you are notified of a change like this, don't panic, as it may open up an opportunity to get into a seat that you weren't able to book originally. If changes are made, don't accept them online. Look at them by all means, but don't accept them. Then fire Matrix back up and work out which flights you now want to take before you make the call. The agents will be helpful and they will offer you options, but if you're not steering the rebooking process, it'll be really hard to tell in real time whether what they are suggesting is going to work for you from a tier point perspective. And remember, tier points are a BA concept. American Airlines won't know what you're talking about if you bring them up in the conversation. So take control of that call and you should be able to make something work. Now a quick word about positioning. I needed to get to Dublin to be able to take the first flight of this trip back to London. Even if positioning trips are made on the same airline, you will not be protected if something goes wrong. So if your positioning flight is delayed and you miss the first leg of your tier point run, you'll be in a world of pain because you won't be automatically rebooked. They'll consider you to be a no-show and will cancel the whole thing. The consequences are more significant at the start of a trip than they are at the end. So when starting one of these, I always like to leave an overnight buffer between my positioning and my first flight. And I had planned to do that on this trip. So to keep the pattern of flights I needed to make the videos I wanted, I had to rebook from London to Boston to New York to Los Angeles. And that Boston flight left at 10 AM, which was too early for me to be able to get across from Dublin that same morning. So that meant that I moved the first leg of my tier point run from Dublin back a day, and I had to pay about 30 quid to shift my positioning flight back even further to leave myself a good buffer to connect. And that cost me about 30 quid, so AA schedule changes did end up costing me some money, but it all worked out in the end. So let's get to the airport. I didn't make a video about the flight from Dublin to London, and I've shown the delights of Dublin Airport a couple of times previously. But the interesting points from this trip were that the Dublin lounge now has a 2-drink maximum, which tells you a little bit about its clientele, I suspect. I will report that this limit was policed via an honesty system, and despite having been an accountant for 25 years, it would seem that I struggle to count to 2. Soup is available, but all other food options are cold, but I still think it's a decent offering. Some good sandwiches and lots of cakes and snacks. BA's short-haul business class seat is not great. I've booked to endure this layout for 5 hours down to Amman later this month, so look out for that video, the things I do for you, dear viewer. But I enjoyed the afternoon tea, washed down with a gin and tonic, and the flight was on time, so all in all it was a good flight. I was hand baggage only this trip, and that's an important point. As I share a little of the Thistle hotel where I spent the night, checking baggage on a trip like this is a bad idea. Each connection you make comes with a risk of a checked bag being misplaced, and as you can have 3 or 4 connections back to back, those risks mount up pretty quickly. And complicated itineraries will make it hard for lost bags to ever catch up with you. So one of the planning tips I promised to share is to pack light, such that everything you need for your trip fits into your carry-on. So let's try the Steve Marsh walk and talk trick. Off to the airport, Terminal 3 today, and today is a big day, London to Los Angeles. If I took a direct flight, I could be there in about 11 hours, but taking the route I'm taking, it's going to take me 24, which means it's probably 25 hours now before I next see a bed. Now I'm ambitious to get a couple of naps on the way, but it's going to be a long day. A long day spent hopefully in a reasonable amount of comfort with a lot of food and drink, but a long day nevertheless. I made a video about my American Airlines flights to Boston, and it was a very good experience. Flying American is a good option if you're making one of these trips. And let me talk about jet lag. I've travelled a lot, so I've gotten pretty good at managing jet lag. I can pretty much sleep on command these days, but if it's more of a struggle for you, there's 2 approaches you can take, especially if you're only going to be in your turnaround city for a couple of days. The first is just ignore the time difference and stay on your home time zone. Probably easier said than done, but even if you split the difference and only try to adjust for perhaps half of the actual time change, that can make it much easier than trying to adjust to the whole difference. And if heading to the US, getting up and going to bed earlier is not a bad way to see a place. I wanted to adjust to California time for this trip, so here's a couple of things I do to make that transition easier. As soon as I get on the plane, I set my watch to the destination time zone, then take it off and put it in my pocket, and I only look at it again when we land. I find that if I just sort of lose track of time when I'm on a plane, it's much easier to click into whatever time zone my watch tells me it is when I land. And then on arrival, I try really hard to immediately operate on the time zone I've landed in. I'll eat meals according to the new time zone, and I'll go to bed according to the new time zone. And that, for me, usually does the trick. But it's important to not continually translate the time you're in to the time it would be at home. It just clouds your mind with doubts as to what you should now be doing. Commit to the new time zone immediately and fully forget about your home time zone, and that'll give you the best chance of converting within a day or 2. So 1 flight down, 2 to go. It was a good flight, I enjoyed it. I ate a little more than I expected, and I drank a little more than I expected, but it was a very good experience. And I have about 2.5 hours now until my next flight, maybe 3, so it's time to change terminals. And getting into the United States was a dream. I have global entry, and it took me probably 4 minutes, and it only took that long because I have a new ESTA, which means I had to redo my photo and my fingerprints. So let's find Terminal B here at Boston and get ready for my next flight. It's only just above freezing here, so let's get indoors as soon as we can. Oh, that's better. That global entry comes with TSA Pre at no extra cost, and as I'm increasingly finding the numbers of people with this privilege to be high, the queues are often longer than the regular security lines. The process is much quicker when you make it to the scanner, which makes TSA Pre still worth using, but I fear there will come a time when the regular security lanes are going to be quicker at some times of day. Boston isn't one of America's hub airports, so it doesn't have a flagship lounge. Your 4-legged friends are well catered for though. There is an Admiral's Lounge which I had access to as a silver card holder with BA, and it was quite nice. The food offering is significantly inferior to a flagship lounge, and there is a manned bar rather than a free pour offering. I just had a soft drink on this visit, but if it's like other Admiral's clubs, there'll be a limited range of free alcoholic beverages, free except for a tip of course, plus premium options available for a fee. Good apron views too. So Boston Airport. I reckon I'm about halfway through my 25 hours of travel, and if there was a bed in front of me, I'd probably sleep. Time to grit my teeth and push through. The next flight was a short hop down to JFK, and I didn't make a standalone video about this flight either. It covers a slightly longer distance than Manchester to London, a route on which BA manages to serve a light meal with drinks, but on AA you make do with drinks. Cheers! And a snack, the infamous in-flight mini pretzels. The legroom is better than you get on BA, and we had some great views of Boston after takeoff, but it was a short and uneventful flight that added another 40 tier points to the haul and deposited me punctually into JFK. Right, second flight done for the day, third flight done overall, 220 tier points in the bank, 500 still to go. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Although I have to say the beer I had on that last flight really did perk me up. I was quite surprised at how much of an effect it had on me. So I've got about 3 hours before my last flight, and that's going to be about a 6-hour flight, so I've still got a good 10 hours before I'm going to get to bed, but I am starting to think that maybe I should push through and not go to sleep. When I do eventually intersect with the bed, I'm going to sleep hard for a good 8 hours, and that may actually kill off the jet lag in one night. I have to keep reminding myself that I have quite a big day tomorrow as well. It's not aviation based, but it's a day that I want to be relatively perky for. And I want to experience the full service offering on this next flight, so we'll see how we go. I've got an idea of how I might be able to perk myself up a little bit more before I get on that flight. So let's head off to the lounge and see how we can kill 3 hours. I had access to the Greenwich lounge on this visit and covered it in the video I made about the flight onwards to LA. I didn't talk about the showers though, a facility I took full advantage of in that attempt to perk myself up even further. The Greenwich Lounge was a flagship lounge before it was rebranded and isn't that old, so the shower facility still feels quite new. And 3 hours duly passed, so I headed off to the gate for that flight to LAX. I'd fought hard to get back on AA's transcontinental service for this flight, and I was pleased to be able to report on it in this video, even if I can't say I loved the experience. I said I'd talk about things you can prepare before the trip. Fatigue and tipsiness are probably the two greatest risks of taking a trip like this, and it's wise to mitigate those risks by printing stuff out and taking hard copies with you. Phones run out of batteries and roaming access can be spotty overseas, so I think that preparing physical copies of things is a wise investment of time and printer ink. I usually also make a summary ready reckoner of all of my flights and hotels too. Apps will do this for you, but again, a paper copy is helpful. Plus you can leave a copy with loved ones so they can get hold of you in an emergency. And I also tend to print off a copy of my ESTA and a record of my known traveller number 2, just in case. The best thing about the flight was that we got to LA an hour earlier than scheduled, and I was very pleased to leave the airport and rule a line under a long day of travel. One last annoyance to overcome though. So that's it, we're here. And I'm pooped. But before I can get to my bed, there's one last remaining headache. And of all of the things I do on all of my trips, finding the flaming bus to the airport hotel is probably the thing that gives me the greatest anxiety. It's ridiculous. There should be a better system. Anyway, off to the hotel. The problem is that the bus headlights are so dazzling you can't see which property the bus is serving until it's level with you. It's much easier in daylight, but after dark it's a right pain. But I was lucky that a bus arrived quite promptly, even if I was unlucky to find a monster queue to check in at the hotel. One last torment before I could get to my bed. So about 25 hours after waking up in London, I am at my hotel. There is my bed. Good night. So I'm going to wrap this video up here. Things didn't go quite so smoothly for me on the flight back, and I think that deserves its own video. And if you'll forgive me for being a little bit of a tease, I'll reveal what I did in Los Angeles in that next video. So thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. Please give the video a like if you did, and leave me a comment. Are you going to consider doing a tier point run having watched this? Please consider subscribing if you're new, and if you'd like to support what I'm doing more directly, there's a Patreon account, the link in the description below. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.